Hi everyone, my name is Tom. I'm a PGY2 doctor working in Queensland, Australia. I completed my medical training in the UK before completing F1, and then I did a few months of F2 before making the move out here. So I'm hoping to share a few of my insights from working here, but also just go through the process of getting out here and getting your job as a doctor. So firstly, I'll just go over quickly the medical structure here. So it's slightly different, but across the country, first year doctors, F1s, are known as interns. And collectively, the first 3 years of your training, you'd be known as an RMO. This is an example from Queensland, so in other states you might be known as a HMO. So you can see the structure there. So in the second year, you'd be a junior house officer, and the third year, you'd be a senior house officer. PHOs are non-training grade registrars. Registrars are obviously registrars, and staff specialists are what you think of as a typical consultant. So I think it's well known that life outside of work is pretty good in Australia, so I'll just focus on the work aspects here. So the first thing is hours. So this is an example roster from the emergency department that I worked. This is a 38-hour week roster, and I'd work 8 shifts in a fortnight, and I'd have 6 days off. About half of those shifts would be late, about a quarter would be days, and about a quarter would be nights. And I'd work a run of nights about once a month, 4 shifts a month. You also have this other shift type called an on-call shift, and this is where you're available for 24 hours at a time to be called in from home for any sickness in the department. If you are called in, you get paid at double time. I wasn't called in for 6 months on this roster, so it's pretty good. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this roster. I've had some runs of 4 or 5 days off, so yeah, I was pretty happy with that. So the next thing's responsibility and support. Compared to the UK, I think I was incredibly well supported, and the expectations of more junior doctors is much lower here. I do work in a fairly big hospital, and if you go out more rurally, that's perhaps not quite as true. But generally speaking, to other British doctors, we have much more support, and your seniors are expected to take on more of the responsibility than you would be in the UK. So overall, I feel like in terms of responsibility, I probably had more as an F1 in the UK, just because of the nature of the staffing and how the health system runs. So definitely much less stressful working here. The next thing's PDL, or professional development leave, and professional development allowance. So in Queensland, you get paid $100 a fortnight just into your pay to support professional development, and you also get 1.6 weeks of professional development a year. So it depends what roster you're working, but it's about 7 or 8 days, and I've found that that's been pretty easy to organise. I've had a few days of professional development leave to attend internal training days. So that leads us on to education. So again, really varies on the department and which hospital you're working at. In ED, I had 2 hours a week. The registrars would have 4 hours. And other departments will have varying amounts. It's typically around 2 hours a week, so fairly similar to the UK in that sense. However, it does always happen, and it's usually a pretty good quality and on pretty relevant topics. Besides that, there's been some really good internal training days that I've done. It's paediatric training days, and I've gone on some really good trauma training days. So that's all been really good. So the last thing is annual leave. So in Queensland, you're entitled to 5 weeks leave if you're working at shifts like you would be if you're working in the ED or doing war call or something. Then you get an additional week, so you get 6 weeks leave. One thing to think about if you are coming here as a rotational house officer, then you're probably going to have your block of leave in one 5-week block. There is sometimes some leeway on that, so you might be able to get a 3 and a 2, but generally that block of leave is allocated in one single 5-week block. That's not true if you're working in an emergency department. Obviously, you can just take your leave as normal in that case. They're also usually pretty good at clumping together your leave dates with your off days from the work schedule. So if you apply for 2 weeks leave, you might actually get more like 20 days off, so that's pretty good. So next I'll talk about pay. It's obviously a big thing that people think about when moving to Australia. So I'll just take you through one of my pay slips. So this is really different to what I had in the UK, and it's really clearly laid out. We're paid on a fortnightly basis here, and you can see that exactly the shifts you worked. So if we just go through this pay slip, so on this roster I was working 10-hour shifts, and we don't have paid lunch breaks. So you can see I worked on the Monday and the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Because these were night shifts, these all attracted a 15% penalty, and then the Friday shift led into the Saturday, and so that was paid a penalty rate of 50%. And then you can see the same for the following week. So days followed by an afternoon shift, so you get an enhancement for the late shifts as well. The RMO professional development allowance I've already mentioned, so that's there, and that's my total gross pay for remember that's for 2 weeks work. Then we've got tax, and then we've got this thing called RemServe, which is salary packaging. So that's taken out as a deduction, but that's essentially a tax benefit. So that was paid to me the following day after I was paid from work directly into my account. So to get the take-home pay, you need to add this $1,000 to your net income. So for this 2-week period where I've just worked 8 shifts, so I've worked 38 hours, and I've worked a few nights, some days, and an afternoon. The take home for 2 weeks work was £1,683. So that first pay slip was pretty simple in comparison, and this is a busier pay slip where there's a few more things going on. So again, it's exactly the same thing. It's a 2-week period, and exactly like in the first pay slip, for your 38 hours a week, you always get paid this base rate of just under $3,800 for me as a PGY2 doctor. I've got my professional development leave on top, and then there's a few things that are different. So we just go through shift by shift. So for Monday, you can see I worked my normal shift, which is a 10-hour shift with a half-an-hour lunch break. But on this day, I was caught late because I got stuck dealing with some paperwork. So I claimed for overtime you can see I claimed for 45 minutes there. Overtime's paid at double time, so that was paid at a rate of $99 an hour, just shy of £50 an hour. Because my shifts now exceeded 10 hours in total duration, I'm then entitled to a meal allowance on top of the overtime rate, and the meal allowance is $16 on top. Because this shift was also a night shift, on top of the base rate I've got here, I've got my 15% in penalty enhancement for the night there as well. The Tuesday was just a normal night shift. On the Friday, I've picked up overtime. This Friday happened to be a bank holiday because that was the Easter Friday. Typically, when I work any extra shifts or overtime, that will be paid at double time of $99 an hour. But because this is a public holiday and it's also overtime, it's actually paid at 2.5 times an hour. So I was paid just shy of $125 an hour to work that. That was a medical overtime shift there. So each public holiday is actually paid at a different rate here. So on the Saturday and Sunday, that would have been Easter Saturday and Sunday. They're also paid at 2.5 times. But the bank holiday Monday is just paid at 1.5 times. So you can see there that I was paid my base rate. And then I was paid a 50% enhancement there as well on top. Then I've got Thursday and Friday. Friday again was another bank holiday Friday, so that's another 50% enhancement. And then on the Saturday, there's a bit more overtime there, but because I didn't break that 10-hour mark, I didn't get my meal allowance. Because it was a Saturday, you get paid 1.5 times your rate on a Saturday, and any Sunday shifts are paid at double time. There's also a $49 extra here, and that's because I claimed for some overtime on paper, and there was a bit of a lag in getting paid that. So the total pay was $3,000 for that 2-week period. You can see that I've been charged some tax here. I've also signed up to the union, so that's taken out automatically. My RemServe is a salary packaging thing, which has changed. The amount's changed since the last pay slip, and the reason for that is because you're allowed $9,500 a year as tax-free allowance. Because I moved out mid-year, that $9,500 was divided by the time between when I arrived and the end of the salary packaging year, and now it's refreshed, and so it's 9.5 grand divided 12. So per fortnight that works out as $350 tax benefit there. So again, you have to add. Oh, and the other thing I forgot was the super, which is that's your pension. So you don't have to put anything into your pension if you don't want to, unlike the NHS. It's pretty standard in Queensland to put in 5% of your salary, which I've done there, and then your employer puts in 12.75%. So you can see here that my take home for this 2-week period with all the enhancements and the public holiday penalties and everything was £2,200, and that's with the tax benefit added on. And remember, that's just for a fortnight. So if you sort of double that to a month, you'd be looking at more like £4.5 grand, £4,600 as a take home for the fortnight. So here's just some averages for what I've earned so far. So my gross salary would be about 66,000, and just remember that I'm a PGY2 doctor, and I typically work 38 hours a week. Obviously, now and again I'll pick up an overtime shift, but that takes me to still less hours than I was working in the NHS. And sometimes you might get caught late at work, but that's always paid at double time. So there's a few hours here and there. And my net salary is about 27 grand. So my deductions are about 40% with tax and my pension contributions. Just remember, the only thing here as well that would have come out my salary in the UK is my student finance deductions, which you should pay separately directly to student finance. So the overall deductions will be slightly higher than that. The last thing is that okay, so now I've convinced you to come. The first thing to think about is where you actually want to move to. So I get contacted quite often, and people say, I'm interested in moving to Australia. I'd like to look at jobs in Brisbane, Gold Coast, Adelaide, Melbourne or Sydney. And they're obviously all incredibly different places. So I think the first question, once you've decided that you're going to move to Australia and go through the process and pay all this money to get here, is have a think about where you want to go and why you want to go there. Obviously, you can move once you get here, but it's probably helpful if you go somewhere that you think you'll enjoy. So just do your research before you come, because these are all pretty different places. Where I am at the moment in southeast Queensland, it's pretty warm the whole year round. This time of year in Melbourne it is freezing, so just bear that in mind. So before you do anything else, you first need to check that you're obviously eligible to come and work in Australia. So the first thing is to check your medical school. So that needs to be approved by this World Directory of Medical Schools, is WDOMS, and also the Australian Medical Council. So check both of those out before you start doing anything, because if they're not on the list of approved medical schools, then you can't work here. So once you've done that, the next thing to determine is which pathway you're going to go down. So the majority of UK or Irish graduates would be eligible for the Competent Authority pathway, the CAP. You're eligible for the CAP if you've obviously if you've gone to a medical school that the AMC approve. But you're eligible to come here once you've completed FY1 if you're a UK graduate, or if you're not a UK graduate, you need to have 1 year's NHS experience. If you're not eligible for the Competent Authority pathway, then you'd be looking at the standard pathway. To go through that pathway, you do have to sit the AMC exams, which are, from what I hear, pretty tough and also fairly expensive. So just if you think you might be eligible for the Competent Authority pathway, just definitely look into that, because it's super easy to get approved by the Medical Council here if you are. Obviously, these pathways are for non-specialist doctors, which the majority of doctors moving from the UK are. But obviously, if you're a specialist, then you would go down this specialist pathway, which is pretty complex unless you're of certain specialties where there is a fast track route available. Great. So now you know you're eligible and which pathway you'll probably go down. The next thing you need to do is get a job. So my advice would be to directly contact the hospitals that you think you'd like to work at. It's pretty easy to find their information online. You just by googling Hospital X HR department or medical workforce as it's commonly called here. So you just need to email them directly with a covering letter and your CV. And just say you're interested in working there, and obviously just make it clear, outline your experience and where you're from. That would be the easiest way, and that's how I got a job, and I was offered a few jobs that way. Some people choose to use agencies. I've got no experience of doing that, but people do that successfully. One benefit of using an agency is they handle some of the paperwork, and obviously I suppose you've got the reassurance of working with someone that does it all the time. That said, obviously I went directly through a hospital, and you have the support of the medical workforce people who deal with British and international graduates all the time, so I found them super helpful. And you can also just give them a ring if you've got any questions or anything. The last thing is locuming. So just to know that you can't locum in Australia. So if you come here as a non-specialist doctor, like most of us do, you can't locum in that first year because you'll be on provisional registration. So you can pick up overtime, like I've shown you my pay slips, but you can't pick up formal locum posts and go and work in the outback for lots of money until you've done that first year. Now, your hospital should be able to guide you through the process, but this is just an overview of how everything works. So the first thing you need to do is verify that you're you. And this is through a process called EPIC, or the ECFMG, where you verify you're you and that your degree is real. So you put your information, you upload. Well, first of all, you establish an account with EPIC and you upload your medical degree and some other information that they request. You then have to go through this process called Notary Cam, where you're verified by a public notary that you're real, and you have to take an oath to tell them that you really are you. Once you've done that, or probably simultaneously, you establish an AMC account, because EPIC will inform AMC that you're you, and then you'll be able to complete the setting up of your Australian Medical Council account. If you're going through the competent authority pathway, then your medical degree will be enough. But if you need to sit exams, and that's a point where the exam sort of portal becomes available to you. So once you've done that, the next thing you need to do is get your documents notarized. So you don't have to do this in person. You can do this online. So everyone that I know has used fufulling. You need your passport, you need your ID, essentially your driving license, and you need your full birth certificate. I've had a couple of mates get caught out by this, so your birth certificate needs to be your full original birth certificate. People get caught out by getting a copy verified or the short form of the birth certificate certified. It has to be the original to meet the APRA requirements. And the last thing is you need to obviously get your medical degree notarized. Next, you need a certificate of good standing. So if you're in the UK and you're working for the GMC, all you need to do is go on the GMC online portal and you just click Certificate of Good Standing, or COGS, and click where you want them to send it to, which is obviously APRA. So you obviously need to have completed F1 before this means anything, but that's all you need to complete to demonstrate that you're on the general. You've got general registration and you're on the medical register in the UK, and you are of good standing, and APRA are happy with that. If you aren't UK trained, or you haven't done all your training in the UK, and you've perhaps done your degree in India, it's from a certified medical school, and you've moved to the UK, you've done your 1 year of NHS service, then you just need to get a notarized certificate of experience from the hospital, and that can just be from your employer to just outline what role you've done. Once you've got that sorted, you need to do a criminal check or criminal health check. There's a couple options APRA give you. I used AIS, and that was pretty cheap and easy to sort out. So once you've got all these bits together, you can now finally do your APRA application. This used to all be a paper form, but my friends that are going through the process now tell me this is all an online system, so you can just do this all online and upload your information. The other thing the hospital will give you, I put plus minus there, you definitely will need to do this unless you're a consultant. This is a supervised practice plan, and it's just an agreement with your employer that the level of supervision that you'll have while you're working under that employer, because remember that the employer is essentially sponsoring you as a doctor and saying they'll give you appropriate supervision whilst you're working there. So the APRA stuff for me took 2 weeks. So once I sent everything off, well, once I've completed the application and paid a lot of money to them that they asked for, then you can look at doing your visa. So for me, it took 2 weeks to get my APRA approved. For some people, this takes much longer. What I found after a couple of weeks, just short of 2 weeks, I contacted APRA just to say I'd like to hurry things up so I can apply for my visa. And 2 days after I contacted them, it was actually approved. So if you've been waiting a long time, it may be sensible to just get onto APRA and see if they could speed things up for you. So with visas, the most common is 482. This used to be called the Temporary Skills Shortage Visa, and that's the visa I have. So that's a 2-year employer-sponsored visa. It's now called the Skills in Demand visa, and there's a few different durations. But the standard one that you would be on as a doctor is a 4-year visa. So the first thing you need is your employer nomination. So your employer will do exactly that, and they'll send something off to immigration, and you'll get a nomination through your emails. Even before any of that's happened, you can do your health check. So you need to have a health check to prove that you are healthy, and that includes things like checking your renal function, having a chest X-ray, and seeing a GP to make sure you're fit and you're not going to burden the Australian healthcare system. So that's pretty expensive. I had mine done in Knightsbridge. But when you book that, you get a code, and that code's linked to your health check and your medical records and everything. So you can do that before APRA's approved you or anything. You can sort of get that at any point in this process. So once you've done your health check, or it doesn't necessarily have to be in this order, you have to do an ACRO. So this is a police check for the UK. So the AIS, the first one we spoke about for APRA, was for Australia. ACRO is a police check for the UK. Annoyingly, your DBS that you've had every so many years for different hospitals and things doesn't count for this. The ACRO takes quite a while. I think it takes a few weeks. You can pay something like double to get it a bit quicker, but just make sure you get that in early. Just remember there's different expiry dates on all these things, so just check the APRA website. So I think the ACRO's valid for 3 months, but just make sure you check that before you start sending off and applying for things. The next thing you have to attach to your visa application is supporting documentation, obviously, so everything we've already spoken about, but also your APRA confirmation, and that literally can just be an email saying we accept you in principle. It doesn't have to be any formal approval. Also, other evidence might involve, if you're bringing in a de facto partner and adding them onto your visa, you might want to add pictures, bank statements, flights and things, just to prove that de facto partnership, or you might be married and you'll have to add your marriage certificate. I've somehow missed the GTE statement, so that's a genuine temporary entry statement. So you have to sort of write that in the application, and you also have to upload one, I think, from memory, as an attachment. This is just a statement explaining your reasons for entering the country and explaining that you are a genuine temporary resident. So you'd have to just state that you're expecting to leave the country, and you're here for genuine temporary reasons. I'm not completely sure of the reasons for this, because a 482 visa is probably the most well-trodden path to permanent residency and then citizenship in Australia for UK doctors, so that's just part of the application you have to go through. Once you've got everything sorted, you then can apply and pay lots of money to immigration. So just to mention with the visa, mine took 2 days. I think actually it was less than 48 hours to get approved. So that's pretty quick, but not unusual. I've had friends that have had their visas approved within a week. For some people, it takes a bit longer. So one workaround for that, if things are getting pretty tight and you're wanting to enter the country, you can enter Australia on a tourist visa and sort of get your life set up. And whilst you're waiting for that visa to be approved, I think the tourist visa typically has 3 months on. So it gives you a bit of time while you're waiting for that to come through, and you get onto immigration and try and get your visa approved. So this is just a summary of all the costs of just applying, and just to reiterate, this is just to apply. This is $2,500 just for the paperwork. The costs add up super quickly. So you've obviously got to get here, you've got to fly here, you probably want some extra luggage. You're going to need a bond. You need, for your first rental, you need some temporary accommodation or an Airbnb when you arrive. So it all gets pretty expensive pretty quickly. Just make sure to speak to your hospital about their reimbursement policy. So in the state that I'm in, the official guidance says that there's no limit and everything's negotiable. My employer interprets that as $3,000 per doctor, or $4,000 if you come over as a couple, and that's to support your flights and 1 week's accommodation. If you go to other hospitals, so for example, I've got a friend that works at a hospital just north of where I am, and because that's a bit more rural, they actually give you up to $15,000 to relocate. So just make sure you ask your hospital what's up for grabs. So I hope you found that helpful. Inevitably I would have missed something out, so feel free to reach out to me via email, message, or just comment below. I've written a full ebook on this topic, and you can download that for free using the link in the description. And if you're a medical student or doctor and you're not quite sure what you want to do with your career, I'm running a 4-week career clarity challenge. We ran it last month. We had some really good feedback. If that's something that interests you, you can join us using the link in the description box, and we start on the 7th of July. Thanks.